This is to say goodbye to Professor Peil. Goodbye, Professor. I just found out that he died. I looked in the internet. For some reason, I don't even know why, I had the urge to Google his name. And I Googled his name, and at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and went to his page, and his page was empty, except for a date. And I thought, why was something? What's wrong here? These guys can't even keep up their internet pages. That's annoying. I did refresh and try, and then I looked closer at the date, and there was a little cross by it. And it was his date of death, which was in August. I don't know what to think. I mean, we didn't have a relationship. He was a guy. I studied Mediavistik, which is the study of the literature of the German Middle Ages in Munich at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich in the 80s, actually, in the late 80s. And I had one professor who I find out also, by the way, he was also dead. I looked up his name also. He died also a couple of years ago, not long ago. Harms was his name, Harms. I started out with him, and he and I didn't get along. And, he was, I don't know, I was intimidated by him, I think. And my German wasn't very good. I, tried to do my papers in German as well as I could, and they weren't that good, and he had problems with it, and so I switched professors. And so I did my master's thesis, my Magisterarbeit, with Professor Peil. And I didn't know him well, and he didn't know me well, but he saw me struggling, with the language, and also a little bit, I guess, with the subject, because even though I loved and still love medieval literature, I got to say the study of medieval literature is fairly dry. It's all about, additions and comparing, this manuscript with this manuscript. They're all hand, copied manuscripts, and there's a C missing here, and what does that mean? It's kind of like, and it's really. And it's not and that's not who I am. I'm the guy. I do not like footnotes. I'm not the guy for footnotes and for correct spelling. I'm the guy who wants the structure, the overarching, the narrative arc to work. I'm the guy who wants to figure out some kind of meaning or some kind of general thing that I can take home from what I'm reading. Some kind of big myth, some kind of big iconic statement. That's what I'm looking for. And of course, in academia today, that's or at least in literature academia today, and that was in Mediavistik, that was very much the case. You don't do that because, of course, there is no overarching truth to what you read. There is no overarching story. It's just a collection of words in the end. If you try to find out the central statement that the work means in society, it meant something else in the Middle Ages than it did today. Clearly, something way different, and it means something else different, something different from you to me. Way different. So it's all subjective, of course. And so if you try to find some kind of objective big statement, some objective truth, you can't find it. And so much of academia has said, well, then if we can't find it, we don't look for it. Instead, we look for, the difference between this copy and that copy, and why this word is missing in this copy and is there in that copy, and what is the original what was the original word that writer 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago wrote, trying to figure out, comparing these two copies of a manuscript, that has been copied and recopied over the centuries. And I get that, I understand that, but I just cannot do that. That's not who I am. I want the big truth. I want, even if it's suggestive, even if it's subjective, even if it's untrue. I want to look at history, and I want to get the story that history is telling us, because stories mean life. Stories tell us what life is. They inform and define our lives. And footnotes do not do that. To live, you need the stories. You have to look back at your history and ask your history, who am I? And history has to tell you. That's what history is about. History is about telling you who you are now. That's what history is about. And whether it's true or not, and whether the guys in history would recognize the story you're telling about them, that's completely irrelevant. It's about who you are now and what this means for you. That's what we need as human beings. That's why we need stories. Okay, anyway, I'm getting into a preaching mode again. So I was having it, and I was, one of my biggest memories of studying in Munich was in the big library for they have different libraries for different areas of study, and for Germanistik, which is the study of German language, which is Mediavistik, the study of medieval German literature, is part of Germanistik, and in this library, I just remember how warm it was and how dusty, and the sun would come in, and I'm trying to figure out the footnotes, I'm trying to figure out the Latin, and the old German, the medieval Middle High German, which was the language they spoke and wrote in around 1100 or 1000, and I'm trying to figure it out and trying to compare this and that and trying to take my notes so I can write my paper, and my eyes are going like this, and I'm just going, I cannot. It was so difficult to fight that, and I fought and fought and fought, and it was just this inner struggle. The struggle was more important than the actual papers, the actual books, that I was trying to read and trying to figure out, and it was just torture. It was torment. I'm just not that guy. I'm sorry. And of course, as a writer, no matter what kind of writer you are, you have to spend a lot of your time researching and reading other writers, reading other books, and doing research. So it taught me how to do that, of course. And I learned how to do that, and I still have to do it today, and I still do it today as a journalist or as a fiction writer, both. But it was just, as an academic writer, as an academic student, it was horrible. It was just excruciating. It was difficult. It's the most difficult job I ever had, probably. It probably was, frankly. And just staying awake. I'm talking about staying awake. That was the most difficult job I had. And so I had my final paper, my master's thesis, and it was about, and I'm still kind of proud of that thesis because I learned a lot from it. It's about so-called Exempelfiguren, which is called, you would call them example characters, example tropes. I don't even know actually what the English word would be, but they are standard characters and stories that you can mention, and everyone knows the story without telling the story. Like the Good Samaritan. Okay, the Good Samaritan is just a word for a guy in the Bible who doesn't have a name, right? But everyone knows the story. So you don't have to say, like the Good Samaritan who did this and that and this and that. You just say, like the Good Samaritan. And everyone knows the story. So you have just this little, a clause in the sentence, but it's filled with backstory. It's filled with this story of the Good Samaritan. And so I took out, I don't know, 5 or 7 or 3, I think maybe 7, 5. I don't know. And anyway, I picked out probably 5. Let's say 5. It was 5. I have it here in the back. I have it. I have the paper still. I saw it recently. And I picked out 5 of these Exempelfiguren, these characters, these literary tropes, and which were popular in pedagogical educational medieval literature, meaning like self-help books written in the Middle Ages, and there were such things. They weren't self-help books then. They weren't called self-help books. They were called something else. Prinzenspiegel, for example. And so I took like the Renner and a couple of others, and I looked at how these Exempelfiguren were used, including which I found personally the most interesting was Aristotle. When we talk about Aristotle today, it's hard to say what you think, what associations that brings. For me as a writer, it brings associations of, things about writing. It's poetics. His great work on poetics, which discusses the 3-act structure and things like that. But back then, we talked about Aristotle. It was the old man, the old intellectual man, and this is the first culture wars. In America, we have the culture wars of the urban, educated elite, who are kind of woke and liberal, and the country, kind of yokels who don't go to school, but they know about life. They're practical guys. And the difference between these two characters. And so Aristotle was the urban academic elite who only knew life by book learning. And so he's an old guy, and he flirts with this young girl, and this young girl flirts with him and, makes him the eye, gives eyes, gives him the eye. I'm looking for some kind of a saying that I can't find. Doesn't matter. And so he is flattered. He says, I'm gonna get sex. Academic old men need sex, I think, more than anyone else. Faust is built on that premise. The Blue Angel, the great film by Joseph von Sternberg with Marlene Dietrich, The Blue Angel, is built on that premise, and that's that was a film based on a book by one of the Manns, Klaus Mann, I think. Whatever. So the premise of the old academic man, realizing all this book learning, all these falling asleep in libraries, trying to figure out the footnotes, that's nothing compared to sex with a beautiful woman. Clearly that everyone knows that. Just the academic takes, the first 50 years of his life, he doesn't know that. So finally he figures it out. And so Aristotle figures that out. And the girl says, come to my castle window tonight, and I will lower down a basket, like on a winch. I will lower down a basket. You get in the basket, and I will pull you up to my window, and we'll have sex. And so he does it. He gets in the basket. She pulls him up on the winch, and of course she stops halfway. So when the morning comes, he's stuck in the basket halfway up the room, up the castle, up to the window, and he's a laughingstock. Everyone laughs at him. So she made him into a laughingstock, made him into the fool, the academic genius when faced with the sexual attraction of carnal desires becomes the fool. That's the trope. That was the trope that people thought of in the Middle Ages when they thought of Aristotle. They didn't think of all this stuff that we think of Aristotle today. They thought of this trope. That was it. The old man, the smart old man, being made a fool by a sexy young girl. That was it. That was what my thesis was about. That and a couple of other medieval characters who were kind of standard trope characters, and that was my favorite. Aristotle was my favorite anyway. Okay, so I had trouble. I'm trying to talk about Professor Peil, and I never really knew him. It was just kind of a very kind of, I didn't know anything about him. But he saw that I was struggling and I needed help. And so he helped me. He showed me, this and that. Here, you're overthinking this. Do this. You need more footnotes here. You're going off on a tangent. I tend to go off on tangents, as you can see, right? And so, and also the language. He said, what? Just give it to me. I'll rewrite. Get this grammar. I'll just do it. Got in the typewriter. He just did it. It was easier to just do it than to discuss and teach me the fine parts of German grammar, or to remind me that this is more English than German, even though it's German words, but I'm using a English grammar, and I would turn in one draft, and he would just come, and he would correct everything he could, and I would type in his corrections, and I would type my own corrections, and think, is this what I want to say when I'm trying to say, and it was, and it was my thesis, it was my research, it was my thesis, everything I said, but he did more work on it than you could expect of a professor, because he saw that I was struggling, and he saw that I needed help. And instead of saying, I don't have time for this, this some American coming over, why doesn't he go to America, do it in his own language? What is it, He didn't do any of that. He said he saw a young man struggling. And of course, he had been one young man once. And he helped me. And he said, the guy needs help, I'm going to help him. And he did that. He didn't, I think I sent him flowers afterwards or something. I said thank you in some way, and he helped me to get through it. And that's like the greatest thing you can do, because when you're young, you need help getting through life. You don't know how it works, and if someone has helped you when you were young, and you're older, you realize that that's part of your job as an old dude, to help the young dudes get through. And he did that. He did it without question, without wanting, extra praise or anything. He just did it because he wanted to help the young dude trying to get by. And he's dead now. He's I looked up his Wikipedia page. He was, let me see if I can find this here now. He was born in 1943. So he reached a good age. He'd reached a good age. So it wasn't, he could have kept living, actually, now that I think of it. He was 80, beginning of the 80s. He was born in 1943, died in 22. So he was young 80. And he could have lived a couple of years. Maybe it was Corona. Maybe it's just old age. 80 is a good age to die. It's fine. He had a good life, and he had several publications. He was an honored and respected professor at the University of Munich, and I'm sure he had a good life. Did he have family? I don't know. The Wikipedia page is very short. I hope he did. I hope he had a good life. After getting out of college and after he helped me, I didn't have any more contact. But when I published my first book, actually, which was a trip through the Middle Ages in a VW van looking for the Middle Ages in Germany and Austria today, and it's a travel log, with a lot of searching for the Middle Ages. When I published my first book, I sent it to him, and I said, thanks. And he sent me back one of his books that he had just recently published about a rather esoteric medievist, a medieval German subject, which is only mainly interesting to academics. But I don't think he remembered me, which is fine. There was nothing there. I was just a guy that needed help, and he helped me. So, Professor Peil, thank you. Thank you for helping.